everybody. I'm Aaron Simmons, and this is Two Philosophers, One Conversation, where we remind ourselves that philosophy has always been about the public good and that we've got to do our best to make meaning in light of the fact that we are mortal beings. I'm joined today by Sai Bhatawadekar, who is a good friend of mine, somebody I've collaborated with and worked with and benefited from over many years. She's helped me think about all the things that I think about and has done so in remarkable ways. She is currently the director for the Center of South Asian Studies and associate professor of Hindi and Urdu and Indo-Pacific languages and cultures at the University of Hawaii, though I'm not sure how she fits all of that on a business card. She also teaches Bollywood and Indian folk dancing in the community and thinks a lot about the intersection of German studies and South Asian studies, and does this in ways that connect to cross-cultural conceptions of religious identity as related to our embodiment and our mode of being in the world. So Sai, it's wonderful to have you with us today.
My God, what an introduction. Thank you.
Part of why I knew that I wanted to get you on this show was because the pandemic that we're wrestling with right now is a global phenomenon. It's something that is in many ways reinforcing our national boundaries because we're closing them all down, but it's also reminding us that national boundaries entirely disappear at the level of the human condition and human embodied suffering, which is very much what we're trying to experience around the world and figure out ways to navigate it. I would love to hear your thoughts as someone who genuinely understands a global perspective and thinks globally in your research. How is it that you are learning from this current human situation, the way the world has changed? How has this affected the way that you understand human existence, human civilization, and maybe even the way that our embodiment unites us together?
That's a big question. As you know, I work on sort of on the philosophical side. I work on Hegel and Schopenhauer, which are completely two different perspectives, right? So on the Hegel side, I'm constantly thinking of self-awareness and what do I know about myself and how much have I learned new things looking at what I've done and so on. And on the Schopenhauer side, I'm completely depressed. Philosophically, I'm always torn between the two perspectives and how to sort of bring them together. But in some ways, my dance, which sort of happened later in my life and also later after philosophy, because, you know, as you know, we philosophers are so sort of oriented toward what our minds can do, and we sit and we write and we remotely connect to each other through thoughts. And when I started dancing, I kind of realized, oh my God, I have a body and I can stand straight. And if I stood straight, I feel something different. And if I, you know, all these sort of interesting experiences and experiments. So for example, if I eat something in the morning, how does my mind work? And if I fast or if I cut out certain foods, by the evening, I could handle, for example, students' crises much more easily. There have been other experiences in my life where it was extremely traumatic. Things were, I had lost hope in my life. I thought there was no justice, no meaning, no friendships. And I realized that my body did something to get me out of it without my mind desperately trying. In the sense that, actually I should say that my mind had thought and thought and thought and thought and had not found an answer or had not found a solution to come out of it. And this is, you will relate to this, this is also the kern, the kernel, the core of apophasis, where your mind, your words, your analysis, your metaphors, everything you've put into it, and they don't get you anywhere. And then something else happens, silence happens, or your body happens, which happened in my case, that somehow does something that looking back, you thought, oh, my body knew what to do in this situation. And this dance kind of, it came out of my classroom. So what initially it happened, I was teaching a language and I was saying, okay, how can we learn vocabulary? It's the traditional methods, you know, I'm always a creative person. I'm in theater and music and stuff. So just like sitting with with a piece of paper, and memorizing didn't appeal to me. So I said, oh, how about we put our bodies into it? So these are eyes, aankhein, and pool, and bhavara, and so on. So I started teaching Hindi vocabulary through movement. And so my students said, how about we just do it every week? And we started meeting every week, claiming public spaces, putting music on, and started dancing. And it was so joyous, and there was no pressure of perfection. We were not doing classical. We were not doing something that needed, careful attention. We were just explaining and expressing things from our bodies. Yeah. And then people started going, passers-by, they said, oh my God, you guys look so happy and fun. It's like, come join. And so it sort of became a group, and a lot of, beautiful and talented and lovely people joined us, and we taught each other. And it turned into a proper dance class that turned into yearly performances and concerts, like full 1.5 hour concerts at Honolulu Museum of Art, at other, locations throughout Honolulu. And then my dean asked me, why don't you teach a dance class at UH? And I was like, okay. So then I brought, the language class and the dance department and the theater department together. And now I teach a dance class. And then that turned into I was asked to co-direct a Midsummer Night's Bollywood Dreams. It's a major theater production that happened last year. So connecting that with the current crisis, and the idea that body has, I don't want to say body has its own consciousness, because in Eastern traditions, as you know, philosophical traditions, you do not separate mind and body. I think that's a lot of Western philosophy tries to bring them together desperately, because there has been a separation between the two. So in Eastern thought, a lot of times, especially East Asian thought, everybody uses the term mind-body, right? Or even mind-body as a process. So not as an entity, not as a self, especially in Buddhist context, but a process. Yeah. And it's constantly changing. So a lot last time I met Thomas Kasulis, who is a philosopher of Zen Buddhism. He's in Ohio State, and he was my advisor. He had a couple of hip replacements, and he was telling me that, especially from the Buddhist point of view, he thinks that old age or disease or ailment is not something happening to me. I am old age. It's not like I am lamenting and I'm sitting and I'm thinking, oh my God, what happened to me? Why am I old? Why do I look like this anymore? I'm not. He said, these things are not happening to me. This is who I am in the process. Combining that sort of this interest, body mind as a process perspective, and then the joyous moment of dance that brought a different awareness of my body to me as a person experiencing crises, right? That at a moment where your mind is at a loss of what to do, that somehow your body will know. That has helped me, or at least I hope that helps me in the future also, in the sense that my house is usually a mess. I keep things everywhere and I can't find them, and then I have to. There's somebody who sort of casually said, in especially crisis times, said, "What is your sacred space? Do you have a corner in your house that is your sacred space?" And this sort of resonated with me, because I grew up Hindu, although I have no idea if I'm Hindu or whatever. Because at my household, you would have a little tiny space with all the altar, all the gods and goddesses. And it wasn't an exercise in actually understanding what godliness is. It's just sort of like, we do this. It's a power of ritual kind of idea. And it's sort of, when somebody said that to me, what is your sacred space here? And, here I don't have an altar. And so in that sense, I started thinking about, I change spaces, I change places. I don't have a home really, because I don't feel at home in India. I don't feel at home so it's like this new cosmopolitan homelessness in identity. So what's the one constant thing in my life that I can keep sacred, or and that was my body, right? That's like, okay, this is where I am constantly. I cannot go out of it. I cannot, unless I die, of course, but this is the one thing that is home, because I don't have any other home. And so it's okay, so maybe this is the sacred space, and maybe I should consider this as what I would do in front of the altar, make sure my hands are clean, or what I eat, for example. Like, I mean, of course, I don't follow this all the time. Of course, I'm, at the end of the day, I see, oh, I ate too much bread or cheese or things like that. But the impulse, the reminder sometimes helps to say, okay, so this is the space that is my home. Actually, when I was giving a lecture in India this summer, somebody asked me where my home was, because I was still talking about all this cross-culture stuff and all these beautiful students in Ferguson College. They said, so where is your home? And I couldn't answer. And then after like a couple of seconds of silence, it came out, my body, it came out. I didn't think about it. It just sort of like, oh, my body is this is where I live. It's like, this is the sacred space.
Because as you know, I mean, one of the things for our listeners that Sai and I have worked on is, several years ago, we were part of a grant project on cross-cultural conceptions of religious understanding. And we in particular focused on apophatic, or ways in which religious understanding tends to overflow or go beyond normal comprehension of things in the world. Such that at some level, maybe what we can say of the divine or of the transcendent or of God is ultimately restricted to a kind of denial saying, right? What's God is not X, or the divine is not Y. So in light of that work that we had done previously, one of the things that's always fascinating when I hear you speak is the way that you draw on your own background in Hinduism, and yet it resonates with me seamlessly in many ways with my own anchoring in Pentecostal Christianity. So when you talk about the body being home, in many ways it makes me think of the way that for some Christians will talk about the passage in the Bible where it says that our bodies are to be temples of the Holy Spirit. And yet at its most basic, I think that it's an encouragement to a recognition that wherever we go, there we still are, right? Almost like a frat boy sort of philosophy logic, on your t-shirts or something. But there's something smart about this, I think, in the context of a global reality where all of us are having to stay home, and we're in many ways having to adjust to this fact that we can't go where we want to be, we can't get to where we think we need to be. And yet, if we understand at some level this kind of sacrality of body as home, a question we might ask is, where is it we think we need to go, right? Where is it we think we need to be? And that I think does invite a kind of different shift of perspective, right? Where it's not like I'm missing out on what's going on elsewhere. It's, no, previously I was unreflective about what was going on because I kept trying to avoid it by surrounding myself with speed, with voices, with cacophony of the modern world. And now we're all kind of having to discover, despite the technology of Zoom and the fact that we're talking from halfway around the world, we are still having to discover what we might call a kind of stillness and a kind of slowness that I don't know if our bodies have become attuned to yet. What are ways that we can start creating this, you might say, embodied attunement that allows us to able to be comfortable with the stillness that has unfortunately been kind of imposed upon us right now?
I've never followed sort of a particular mode of meditation, or usually I'm always sort of wanting to learn from other people, and I'm cursing myself. It's like, no, I can't meditate, or I can't sit still, or I need music in my mind or in my ears or whatever. And a lot of times I forget that I have my own means that work with me, right? So back then, for some reason, I started thanking my body. I started from my big toe, my foot, ankles, and sort of working my way up, and sort of even all the way up, thanking my left brain, although those theories may or may not stand anymore, but my left brain for being so amazingly analytical, and my right brain for being creative, and sort of consciously relaxing. And then I realized how clenched I would otherwise be walking around. So, and that I mean, you have no idea, but that kind of, I hesitate to use the word epiphany, but something changed in that mode of meditation. Like, seriously, I started feeling an integral part of the entire universe, in the sense, like, I remember feeling if I moved like this, the entire design of the universe moved. Like, it was a weird feeling. And it makes me feel ridiculous to say this, because again, as a philosopher and as an analytical, rational person, I feel like, what the hell, I shouldn't be even saying this in public, this experience, right? And I felt extremely centered, but also connected. I had this amazing feeling, and I explained this to my former German Romanticism professor, and he immediately said, "Witch, burn her."
The point that you're making about the idea of cultivating an embodied awareness of gratitude seems really, really important right now, because it's very easy. I know my students continue to reach out to me because they're so frustrated. They've lost their senior year. They've lost their freshman year. I've got several students trying to withdraw from all their classes because they just can't handle the fact that it's not like it's supposed to be. People are losing retirements in the stock market. People are losing jobs. We had 3.3, I think, million register for unemployment just last week in America. I mean, these are times where it's easy to feel like everything that matters has been taken away. And yet the idea of grounding ourselves in embodied gratitude somehow, despite all of this, right? It seems to be the thing that your practices and your study come together to encourage.
Right. I mean, and I, by no means do I say that this kind of body awareness or gratitude is going to, diminish or decrease the amount of pain that you're suffering because of your loved ones dying, or your jobs, and the complete uncertainty of future. I'm just only talking from the perspective of like you said, what do we have left at the moment? A lot of times we're so used to cursing our bodies for not functioning, right? Like, oh my God, I can't walk as well as I used to because my back is hurting, and But there are two ways I think about the body, in the sense, like, sometimes I think about it as a child. Like, if I had a child who couldn't say anything yet and would cry, right? Like, if the child is in pain or hungry, they have ways to communicate that they are in pain or they need something. And that's, pain is your body's way of telling you, I need attention here, right? So instead of saying, oh my God, why aren't you working properly? Just like drag yourself already to your office. Say, oh my God, I'm sorry, I know you're hurting. What can I do to help you not hurt, that kind of thing. Or the other extreme, thinking of body as your mother, in the sense of saying, oh, you're in crisis, your mother, I'm there for you, I will embrace you. And this kind of the body saying to you, oh, you are struggling, I'm here, rely on me.
One of the things that we've been talking about now is the way that our bodies can become, at some level, sacred spaces, that they can become home, as you described it. I refer to it as, again, this sort of, in my tradition, the idea of it being a sort of temple where God resides.
Yeah, right.
Where we embody gratitude as a kind of mode of existence despite externals. One of the things, though, that's also really interesting about where we find ourselves in light of this pandemic is the fact that isolation might be necessitating these sorts of practices to become better attuned toward the way that we live gratitude in relation to our bodies, where we embrace solitude and a kind of meditational approach to existence in maybe more robust ways. But something else that's emerging is this sense of shared embodied solidarity, where the things that are happening to bodies in China in light of the virus are also the same things happening in New York, are also the same things happening in Venezuela, that are happening in Brazil, that are happening in Tanzania. So given the fact that there's this almost shared embodied condition where we're able to sort of recognize what's going on in the bodies of others in some sort of shared way. And this then seems like it's spilling over, not just the solidarity of suffering, but the solidarity of rejoicing and celebration with Italians leaning out of their windows singing songs together, right? So how is it that intersubjective embodiment might emerge as a model for, if we say approaching our bodies as home invites gratitude, how might intersubjective embodiment invite a kind of activism, a kind of outreach that yields a sort of, you might even say, sense of embodied justice, that we have to care for each other in some lived way, in ways that just a few weeks ago, our differences seemed to be so profound. And right now, those differences seem all kind of to take a back seat in light of the fact that our bodies are vulnerable, they're breaking across the world, but they're also hands reaching out to help each other, physicians and healthcare workers in some ways risking their own bodies and their own families to continue to provide for the rest of us. What about this idea of embodied solidarity that yields a kind of outreach and activism?
At the bottom of justice, solidarity, reaching out, understanding is and just human experience really is empathy for me. I do not understand how people don't have empathy, but I think that's at the core of any relation, and it doesn't even have to be human relation. I mean, your cat, the tree that is outside, and it, in some ways I feel like if we applied empathy, and in some ways, in academic terms Buddhist ethics to farming, to sustainable living, to it just sort of everything becomes healthier. This basic idea that your heart should bleed to see another being suffering is at the core of everything, of justice, of solidarity, of love, of joy. And that's, I don't know, that's how I feel. How could you not reach out to people whose pain you understand right now, right? Like, how could you not say, here, like the theater department, our theater department right now, the costume shop decided that they were going to make, in collaboration with the medical school, they were going to make masks because they know how to. And they bought a bunch of sewing machines, and nobody has to come together in the department. Everybody has their sewing machines. They're going to create masks and give like 1,000 per week or something.
Wow.
And they're going to give out in the community. You know, like it's just natural to think about what you can contribute given your abilities, like the theater, the costume shop, right?
Yep.
And just, yeah, and do it. And for some people, that's staying at home and not in putting other people in danger. For some people, it's, yes, you stay at home. And I'm unbelievably grateful to people who are, I mean, we all are, who are stacking the shelves literally in grocery shops. And, you know, when my perishables run out, we're going to go and get a couple of vegetables. And the fact that we can still do that, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, that the idea of being grateful that we can go get some vegetables is not a thing that would have occurred to us as an occasion of gratitude 3 weeks ago, right? And yet now, as we watch our food supplies dwindle and the supply chains be interrupted, and yet we see local farmers ramping up production to be able to supply, you know, there ends up an awareness of this interconnectivity. One of the things that I appreciate about your work is that you engage the philosopher Hegel, who, for our listeners, Hegel wrote way too many words to say whatever he said. It's very difficult. It's very opaque writing. And yet for Hegel, everything is about the grand narrative. And all the small stories become part of one big one. But now we find ourselves in this big story, and yet the only stories that we're reading are these really small ones about our bodies dealing with the realities of having kids at home, running out of food and having to figure out how to replenish the shelves. How do we stay safe in light of something that we can't see? These are really difficult times at the local embodied level. How is it that maybe your work on Hegel invites us to integrate or to think about the way that the global grand story and the excessiveness of the local embodied realities might be thought of together?
Hegel is always about sort of progress, right? And then this massive Geist being the forward marching entity whose cogs we are. So we are sort of like cogs in this massive machinery, right? And if you are all over the place, then you haven't really understood who you are. So that's one of his criticisms of Hinduism, that Hinduism hasn't figured out what divinity is, so it sort of bursts in 33 million gods because they don't know what the hell God is, right? And so I have been in some ways internalizing this criticism because I feel like, oh my God, I work in philosophy and second language studies and theater and dance, and I have no idea who I am and what is this? Have I not understood myself enough?
Yeah.
And then somebody said to me, like, Hegel is like your authority figure criticizing you for not having your shit together, right? And then I thought, I mean, I have been in this sort of colonial relationship with Hegel all this time, like more than a decade that I've been working on Hegel. And then I thought, you know, instead of thinking of myself as this one cog in this massive machinery of German studies or philosophy, and then thinking like, why am I not the steering wheel? Why am I the little nut and bolts at one of the wheels? Why am I not this? And sort of cursing myself for that, thinking, oh, instead of that, what if I think about myself not as a cog in a big machine that is marching forward? I think about myself as a nexus at which all these disciplines and cultures come because that nexus is needed for them to intersect.
Nice.
Right? What if I redefine what I am? Does that change anything in the in self-cognition? So again, like going back to Hegel, really, does that make any difference in my self-awareness of who I am, looking at what I've done? So it's like a backdoor subverting Hegel at the same time of reinforcing him. And in this, like in the crisis mode that we're in, not thinking about us as like this one cog in the massive march of the disease, right? Or the way the world is going down, and I'm just sort of part of it, spiraling through it. Instead of that, sort of thinking of like stepping out of that global march and thinking, what can I do? Who am I here in this moment? And what can I do to connect to different things, instead of thinking of like this one thing that is part of that massive, thinking of us as individuals, not as like these helpless victims of wherever this global wagon will take us downhill.
Right.
Thinking of what that individual can do, and that's sort of subverting Hegel in some sense, I think. Yeah,
it's a fascinating approach to Hegel, and what I really like about it is the way that it subverts Hegel by appealing in many ways to the very things that are animated in his own thinking. One of the questions I've been wrestling with as a professor is, how has this situation changed my own approach to teaching? And I'd love to hear your take on how, being a professor of linguistics, of languages, how you're rethinking education at this important time.
I'm no longer a teacher of Hindi, right, in this moment, because when I start my Zoom with my students, I'm going to spend as much time as needed to make sure that they're okay, that everybody is safe. And I will get to Hindi when everybody feels okay that we can do this, right? So my duty has expanded itself to be much more than what I thought I was capable of doing. The situation is all consuming, because of which we have to step out of what we did narrowly. I'm having my students do that from their homes in Hindi. So when I teach Hindi, kind of like, oh, this is what I do, and blah, blah, blah. And what did I do today? So we're doing, my segment that we're doing in Hindi is daily routine. So before this COVID crisis, we were doing simple things like, I wake up in the morning, then I brush my teeth, and then I go to school, and then I have class from this and that, and then I come home and cook. And now it's completely shifted. So we use the same grammatical tools, this exact same structure that we have learned to express completely different things. About how my daily routine has changed. How can we relate to each other? How is my friend in Italy doing? How is my mom in India doing? I always feel like I'm not teaching Hindi, or I'm not teaching philosophy, or I'm not teaching dance. I'm actually connecting with people, and whatever I'm teaching is the means through which I'm connecting. So my sister, who used to do karate, she would tell me that if you want to break a brick, with her fist, if this is the brick, you cannot think about the brick, because if you think, oh, I'm hitting the brick, your hand slows down. Then you can actually not break it. So if you think that my aim is this, right, I have to hit here, and then I go through the brick, right? So you have to aim past what you think your task is in order to break through it, right? Otherwise, your hand is going to slow down. And that's how I feel about education in general, that my goal, my aim is not to teach Hindi. My aim is to really relate. Again, we're here with empathy, really relate with all my empathy with the person that I'm talking to. And Hindi is just the means by which I do it.
Sai, this has been an amazing conversation. It's helped me think about the way in which embodiment should motivate gratitude. It's helped me think about how our shared situation as embodied humans should motivate a concern for empathy. It's helped me think about how even reading someone abstract and esoteric like Hegel can be a moment of profound self reflection where I recognize what really has always mattered, continues to matter, and I am that nexus of cross cultural engagement at every moment. In many ways, this is what we're discovering via technology, is that the world is very small, despite the fact that the numbers are very big that we're facing right now. So thank you so much for reminding us, as we say always at the end of these episodes, reminding us that philosophy has always been about the public good, and that our task is ultimately to make meaning in light of the fact that we are still mortal beings. Sai, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Aaron. You've always been amazing. I absolutely admire and look up to the ways in which you bring, extremely acute analytical thought together with friendship, with public good, with understanding what life is and where we find ourselves is extraordinary and inspiring. And thank you for your friendship, always, always.
Well, right back at you. And so, to all of our listeners, we'll see you next time on Two Philosophers, One Conversation.